You know, there's something rather curious about this whole business of what we call awakening. Everyone seems to be trying to wake up, to become enlightened, to find out who they really are. But have you ever stopped to notice what a peculiar situation that is? For to say, I am trying to wake up, is rather like saying I am making an effort to be effortless. It's like trying to open your eyes to see the very eyes that are looking. We imagine ourselves asleep, lost in dreams of confusion, fear, ambition, and then we imagine a moment, a glorious flash of lightning, when suddenly we'll be awake. But who, may I ask, is this person that's going to wake up? The very one who's dreaming, of course. And so the dreamer dreams of awakening, which is still a dream. Most of us live in a kind of half sleep. We open our eyes in the morning, we have breakfast, we rush about our business, and we call this being awake. But the awakening I'm speaking of is not about getting out of bed, it's about getting out of illusion. It's about seeing that what we call myself and the world are not two things at all, but one continuous happening, as inseparable as the front and back of a coin. Now, we've been trained from the very beginning to see ourselves as someone inside this skin, a lonely bubble of consciousness looking out at the vast world out there. And from that misunderstanding comes all our anxiety, because the world seems so terribly big, and we seem so terribly small. The universe appears as something happening to us, rather than as us. But what if awakening means realizing there never was a solid me standing apart from everything else? That's rather shocking, isn't it? Because the whole structure of our thinking depends on having a me to do the thinking. So the mind immediately says, wait, if there's no me, then who's listening to this talk? Ah, but that's the trick. That question is the doorway itself. We are forever asking, how can I wake up? But consider, if you can notice that you are asking, if you can hear the voice inside your head saying, I must awaken, then who is noticing that? There is already awareness present, silently aware of the seeker. And that awareness, that still, open, ungraspable presence, is what you truly are. So awakening is not something you get. It's not a prize, not a new status, not a special club. It's more like remembering something that was never really forgotten. Like realizing you were never actually asleep, only dreaming that you were. And you see, this is why all spiritual striving contains a touch of comedy. The poor little ego, like a man lifting himself by his own bootstraps, works so hard to find what was never lost. It's like a fish swimming frantically through the ocean in search of water. The curious notion of awakening, then, is this. There is no you who becomes enlightened. There is simply life, this happening, here and now, waking up to itself. And once you begin to glimpse that, you realize the joke has been on you the whole time. You were never the one seeking. You were what was being sought. And the search, all of it, the struggle, the longing, the prayers, the doubts, was simply the universe playing hide and seek with itself. So the first step, if we can call it that, is not to try to wake up, but to laugh gently at the absurdity of the trying. For in that laughter, something relaxes. And in that relaxation, the dream begins to dissolve. You know, it's one of the strangest things, this endless search for who we are. All our religions, our philosophies, our therapies, our little quests for self-improvement, they're all, in one form or another, variations of the same game. Who am I? Now, the curious part of that game is that the harder you look for yourself, the less you find. It's rather like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You can look everywhere, twist this way and that, and still the seeker remains invisible to itself. Human beings have been engaged in this search since the very beginning. We've built temples, and universities, taken pilgrimages, swallowed all manner of potions, climbed mountains, prayed, meditated, and analyzed ourselves into exhaustion, all in the hope that somewhere, hidden under the rubble of experience, lies this marvelous little nugget called me. And yet, the more we dig, the deeper the hole becomes. The me we hope to find always retreats one step further back, like a mischievous cat leading us around corners. There I am, we say when we discover a new belief, a new identity, a new purpose. But give it a week, and that sense of certainty crumbles like sand through our fingers. It's almost as though the universe has designed the game so that we never win it by playing it. Every philosophy says, you are this. And every mystic whispers, no, you are that. We go on, changing masks, mistaking each new costume for the face behind it. Now, we might laugh at the dog chasing its tail, but we seldom realize we are doing precisely the same thing. The ego, this self-image we carry around, forever runs in circles trying to grasp itself. And even when it stops, panting and dizzy, it cannot see that the tail was always part of the same dog. You see, the self that seeks the self is like a flame trying to touch its own light. The moment you say, I want to know who I am, you have divided yourself into the knower and the known, the subject and the object, and that division is the very illusion we're trying to see through. So the great search for the self is the greatest trick of all, because you were never separate to begin with. You were the universe looking for itself in a mirror, not realizing the mirror and the face are one and the same. Imagine the ocean asking, where's the water? It sends out waves, ripples, tides, a magnificent investigation. But in every movement, in every form, it is already what it seeks. The ocean cannot escape its wetness, and you cannot escape your being. The trouble is that our culture has taught us to look outward to find identity in possessions, achievements, relationships, and even our spiritual progress. We decorate the I with labels. I'm successful. I'm enlightened. I'm broken. I'm healing. But all these are costumes the actor puts on, forgetting that he was never the costume at all. And you see, when you finally begin to suspect this, something inside you pauses. There's a stillness, not because you've found an answer, but because you realize the question was never needed. Who you are isn't something that can be grasped, because the one doing the grasping is what you are trying to grasp. At that moment, something wonderfully liberating happens. The chase slows down. The great cosmic hide and seek relaxes into a smile. You realize that you don't need to find yourself, you only need to stop pretending you were ever lost. And this brings us, naturally, to the next part of our little exploration, to the very heart of the matter, where the question itself turns back upon the asker. Now, my friends, we come to a very curious point, the moment where the question itself begins to undo the questioner. You see, every seeker eventually runs into a wall. After all, the reading, all the meditating, all the retreats and pilgrimages, there comes a quiet little voice that asks, who exactly is doing all this seeking? And that, right there, is the one question that turns everything inside out. Who is hearing these words right now? Don't rush to answer. Don't say your name, your history, your personality. Those are only echoes. Just look, feel, listen. Before any thought can rise to reply, there is already something aware. Before you can think I, awareness is already present, quietly noticing the thought forming. That awareness, the one that cannot be seen, but without which nothing can be seen, that is what you are. You've been staring straight at it your entire life. But because it doesn't have a color, a shape, or a sound, you've overlooked it completely. It's like trying to notice the space in which everything happens, the background so constant that you forget it's even there. When you hear my voice, you think I am listening. But look closer. Is there really a listener? Or is there only listening? The moment you look for the one who listens, it vanishes like mist. All that remains is the act of hearing itself, effortless, spontaneous, happening on its own. Now, that's rather startling, isn't it? Because we've spent so long believing there's a little person in the head, a thinker of thoughts, a hearer of sounds, a doer of deeds. But when you go to find this doer, this inner manager, you don't find a solid someone. You find sensations, memories, words, images, all appearing and disappearing in the great field of consciousness. And the funny thing is, that field is not yours. You don't possess it, it possesses you. Or, perhaps more accurately, it is you. The whole drama of me and my life is like a story unfolding on the surface of that awareness, which itself never moves, never changes, never tries to become anything. When you see this, even for a brief moment, the entire search collapses, because what you were looking for is what was looking. The eye cannot see itself. The knife cannot cut itself. The sound cannot hear itself. And yet, in this seeing of the impossibility, there's a marvelous discovery. You were never separate from anything at all. Every sound you hear, every thought that drifts through your mind, every heartbeat, every breath, all of it is one seamless happening. You are not the observer of that happening. You are that happening, knowing itself. This is the turning point, the moment when the spiritual path stops being a path and becomes a kind of joke, because you realize there was never anywhere to go. The door you were trying so hard to open was never locked. In fact, there wasn't even a door, only the illusion of a wall made of thoughts. Now, this realization is simple, embarrassingly simple, but the mind will try to complicate it. It will ask, yes, but how do I stay in that awareness? How do I make it permanent? And that's just the mind being what it is, a marvelous machine that thrives on problems. It wants to turn even awakening into a project, something to maintain, something to measure. But awareness doesn't need to be maintained. It doesn't come and go, only attention does. The one who notices change is not changing. The one who watches thoughts appear and vanish is not vanishing with them. That stillness, that pure seeing, that is what you've always been. So you see, this simple question, who is hearing these words right now, is not a puzzle to solve, but a mirror. The moment you look into it deeply, the reflection dissolves, and what's left is what was always there. The clear, empty, luminous presence that is life itself. And that, you might say, is the beginning of the end of seeking, or perhaps the end of the beginning. You know, one of the most persistent illusions in all of human experience is the feeling that there's a little person sitting somewhere inside your head, looking out through your eyes as though they were windows, listening through your ears as though they were microphones, and running this whole show called your life. We imagine this inner observer, the thinker of thoughts, the chooser of choices, the doer of deeds, and we say things like, I'm controlling my mind, or I must learn to manage my emotions, or I've got to get myself together. But when you really look for this I who's supposed to be in charge, it's rather like looking for the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. You pull back the veil, and there's nothing there but a lot of levers moving themselves. What we discover when we dare to peek is that life is not being driven by a separate someone at all. There is no little pilot behind the eyes. The seeing, the hearing, the thinking, the feeling, they are all happening by themselves, spontaneously, as waves upon the sea. You see, you don't look out through your eyes, just as the sea doesn't send water through special holes to make waves. The eyes are part of the looking, just as the waves are part of the ocean. There's no separate observer hiding behind them. There is only the act of seeing, effortless, natural, and unclaimed. And yet, the mind insists, but surely there must be a me, someone who's deciding what to do. Well, look closer. Thoughts come, don't they? You don't think them, they happen. Emotions rise up and fade away, just as clouds form and dissolve. Decisions appear in consciousness, followed by action, followed by memory, and then we write the story backward, saying, I decided. But the decision arose just as a bird sings without an author, without an audience, simply because it was the song of the moment. This is what the philosophers mean when they say, there is no doer. It doesn't mean life becomes meaningless or mechanical. Quite the contrary. It means that everything you thought you were controlling is actually far more intelligent than the one who claimed control. When you walk, you're not consciously contracting and releasing each muscle, keeping your balance, calculating angles and forces. You just walk. The body does it gracefully, miraculously. When you breathe, the air flows in and out, your heart beats, your blood moves, none of it under the supervision of some tiny bureaucrat in your brain issuing orders. So who's running things? No one and everyone. The same intelligence that spins galaxies and grows trees is the intelligence that moves your hand when you scratch your nose. You and the universe are not two. You're not a stranger dropped into this world. You are the world aware of itself from a particular angle. Imagine a whirlpool in a stream. It has a distinct shape. You can point to it and say there's a whirlpool. But it isn't made of different water than the rest of the stream. It's the stream taking that form for a while. And when the whirlpool disappears, the stream hasn't lost anything. It continues to flow, just as it always did. That's what you are, not a thing inside the flow, but the flow itself taking this momentary shape called a person. And when you see that, truly see it, the burden of control begins to fall away. You realize that the so-called observer and the observed are not two. The seer and the scenery are one happening. The dancer and the dance were never separate to begin with. Now, this doesn't mean you stop living, or that you must float off into a kind of mystical trance. On the contrary, life becomes more vivid, more alive, because you stop trying to stand outside of it. You're no longer looking at the river from the bank. You are the river. Moving, swirling, sparkling under the sun. And with that realization, something very beautiful begins to happen. The tension of self-consciousness starts to dissolve. You stop watching yourself live, and you simply live. You stop performing your role as the one in control, and become part of the spontaneous symphony that's been playing all along. The illusion of the separate observer fades like mist in the morning, and in its place arises a vast simplicity, the knowing that life doesn't need a watcher to be alive. It's alive already. And when you feel that, not just as a thought, but as a direct recognition, you'll laugh because you'll see that the one who thought it was observing has been the observed the entire time. Now, here's a funny thing. The moment we catch a glimpse of what we really are, this spontaneous, self-moving dance of awareness, the mind immediately wants to do something about it. It says, ah, yes, I understand. So now tell me how to stay in this state. Give me a technique, a method, a practice. But don't you see, that's the same old game beginning all over again. The seeker has changed its disguise. That's all. It has taken up a new hobby called spirituality. It used to chase money or love or power. Now it chases enlightenment. The chase remains. Only the goalpost moves. We are trained from birth to think that everything worthwhile must be earned through effort. So when it comes to awakening, we assume the same rule applies. meditate longer, breathe deeper, chant harder, read every book, collect every mantra, and at the end of this grand marathon, enlightenment will be waiting like a trophy. But, of course, it won't, because the moment you make awakening into an object to be attained, you've placed it somewhere else in the future, outside yourself, out of reach, and that's precisely how the illusion keeps spinning. You see, practice is a beautiful paradox. Techniques can calm the mind, they can open the heart, they can make the mirror clear, but they cannot show you your own face. For the face was never missing. Trying to reach awakening through technique is like polishing a mirror to see what's behind the glass. The polishing has its place, it removes the dust of distraction, but what's behind the glass was there long before you started. I'm not saying don't practice. I'm saying see what practice really is. Meditation, prayer, yoga, ritual, these are not ladders to climb to heaven. They are dances we perform to remember we were never separate from heaven in the first place. But the mind, poor thing, doesn't understand play. It understands work, progress, achievement. It says, I must master this method. I must perfect this technique. And in that effort to control the process, it only reinforces the illusion of the controller. It's like a musician who tries to play beautifully by thinking about every note. The music becomes stiff, mechanical, lifeless, but when the player forgets himself and lets the fingers move as they will, then the melody breathes. That's how awakening happens. When the player and the music are no longer two. There was once a student who came to his teacher and said, Master, I've been meditating for 5 years, just as you instructed, and still I haven't awakened. The teacher smiled and said, Then perhaps you should stop meditating. The student, horrified, asked, Stop? But you told me meditation was the path. And the teacher laughed, Yes, and now I'm telling you to stop. You've turned meditation into another way of trying to become something you already are. That's the heart of it. Every method eventually becomes a trap, because the method implies a goal, and the goal implies a seeker separate from what's sought. It's a subtle trick of the mind, a shadow pretending to chase its own substance. When you realize this, something inside loosens. You stop using meditation to escape from yourself. You stop praying for what you already are. You stop imagining enlightenment as an exotic flower growing on a distant peak. And instead, you notice that every breath, every heartbeat, every sound in this very moment is the flower opening and closing forever. Now, I'm not saying you must throw away your practices, but play them lightly, as you would a flute. Don't meditate to become awakened. Meditate because you are awake enough to enjoy sitting still. Don't breathe to control life. Breathe because life is breathing you. When you see this, every technique becomes art, not labor. Each moment becomes a kind of meditation without method awareness, simply aware of itself. And that's when practice stops being a path and becomes a dance. The point of dancing, after all, isn't to arrive at some particular spot on the floor, but to enjoy every step of the movement itself. The purpose of the song is not the final note, it's the music all the way through. And in exactly that way, awakening is not a destination waiting at the end of a technique. It's the song that's already playing, the rhythm you were always moving to without noticing. So, if you must have a method, let it be this. Stop trying to wake up. Just see that there's never been anyone asleep. Let us slow down for a moment. Listen, just listen. You hear my voice, don't you? The tone, the rhythm, the pauses between the words. Perhaps there are other sounds too, a clock ticking, a car passing, the breath moving in and out of your body. All of this, together, is happening effortlessly. You don't need to remind yourself to hear. Hearing simply is. Now, without changing a thing, without trying to listen more deeply or more spiritually, become aware of the listening itself. Not of what you're hearing, but of that in which the hearing appears, you might notice suddenly a kind of spaciousness, a silence that isn't the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness. The sounds come and go, but this listening doesn't come or go. It was there before the first word, and it remains after the last has faded. This is the moment, the precise, delicate moment, when awakening ceases to be an idea and becomes a living reality. Because you see, you're not the one doing the listening. You are the listening. The awareness that perceives is not owned by you, it is you. And what's marvelous is that this has always been the case. You didn't have to become enlightened to experience it. You didn't need to earn it, deserve it, or understand it. It was never hidden. It's been as close as your own skin, closer, in fact. For it is what makes the sensation of skin possible. The only reason you missed it is that you were too busy looking for it. You thought enlightenment was some dazzling explosion of cosmic energy, a vision of divine light, a thunderclap from heaven, when all along it was the simple, quiet fact that you are aware right now. You may notice, as you rest in this listening, that there's no boundary to it. The sounds don't stop at your ears. They have no location. Even the thoughts that whisper inside your head arise in the same field of awareness as the song of the bird outside. It's all one movement consciousness expressing itself as sound, sensation, and thought. So, tell me, where is the line between the listener and the listened to? Can you find it? You'll see it's not really there. It's a habit of thinking, a way of cutting reality into slices so the mind can play with it. But in direct experience, the world and the one who experiences it are inseparable. And this simple recognition is what all the sages, saints, and seekers have been pointing to. It's not an achievement, it's a homecoming. The prodigal son returns, only to find he never left. The traveler wakes up from a long dream of journeying and realizes he's been lying in his own bed the whole time. When you truly notice that you're listening, there's a moment subtle but unmistakable where the sense of effort falls away. You stop being the meditator, the student, the seeker. You stop performing the act of awareness, and awareness stands alone, shining by its own light. That is the still point of the turning world, the eye of the hurricane, the place where everything happens and yet nothing is done. And what's most extraordinary is how ordinary it feels. No fireworks, no heavenly choirs, just this breath, this heartbeat, this sound, life happening without a doer. When people ask me, how will I know when I'm awake? I always smile, because it's rather like asking, how will I know when I'm alive? You're awake the moment you realize there's no one else who could be. So the moment you notice you're listening, truly notice, you've already arrived. You've stepped out of the story and into the silence behind it. And that silence has always been here, patiently watching you play the role of the seeker. And now the play begins to change. The character on stage begins to see that he is not trapped in the script, but free to dance in it, free. Because the stage, the lights, the audience, and the actor are all the same awareness, wearing different costumes. That's the beauty of it. Once you know you are the listening, the hearing, the seeing, once you know that the world is not happening to you, but as you, then even the simplest moment becomes a miracle. Every sound becomes sacred. Every silence becomes a temple. And life itself, this astonishing, mysterious play, becomes the laughter of awareness discovering itself again and again in every breath, in every voice, in every heartbeat. You see, when you begin to notice this awareness, this effortless listening that was never absent, the mind will almost immediately say, ah, yes, now I understand. I must remain in this silence. I must hold on to it. But that very thought is the beginning of its disappearance, because silence cannot be held. It isn't an achievement, it's a falling, a letting go of the effort to arrive anywhere at all. The tragedy and the comedy of the spiritual life is that we are always trying to attain what we already are. We imagine that silence lies somewhere at the end of the path, hidden behind the noise of the world, waiting for us once we've done enough meditation, or purified ourselves, or finally stopped making mistakes. But the silence I am speaking of is not the opposite of sound. It's not the hush that comes when you've switched off the world. It's the ever-present background in which all sound arises, the stillness that allows movement, the space that allows form. And here is the secret. You don't reach it, you fall into it. Falling into silence is not an act of the will. It happens the moment the will exhausts itself, the moment the seeker grows tired of seeking. You've seen it in the faces of old sages and small children, that effortless ease, that freedom from striving. They aren't performing silence. They have simply stopped arguing with the universe. When you fall into silence, there's no sense of I am now being silent. There is only what is this vast, gentle awareness in which everything appears and disappears like ripples on water. Thoughts come, feelings rise, sounds echo and fade, but nothing disturbs the depth beneath. Many people imagine silence as the absence of thought, the perfect blank mind. But try to silence your thoughts, and you'll see how noisy the silence becomes. The effort to be quiet is itself a kind of inner shouting. The harder you push, the louder the echo. True silence is not the stopping of noise, but the stopping of resistance to noise. It is the moment when the waves are allowed to be waves, and the ocean no longer complains about the storm. It's rather like this. You're floating in the sea. You panic, and you start thrashing about, trying to stay above the water. The more you struggle, the more you sink. But the instant you stop fighting, you discover that the water was holding you all along. You were never in danger except from your own struggle. In the same way, the moment you stop trying to attain peace, peace reveals itself as the very fabric of your being. You don't achieve it, you notice it. And when you notice it, you realize it was never gone. There's a beautiful paradox in this. The silence that people seek through effort can only be found when the effort ends. The enlightenment you long for arrives the moment you stop chasing it. For all seeking implies a seeker apart from the sought, and that separation was the dream from the beginning. When the seeker falls away not through discipline, but through seeing what remains, is life as it is, spontaneous, vivid, ungraspable, free, and that life is silence itself, expressing as sound. It's the stillness moving, the emptiness dancing, the nothingness blooming as everything. You can sense it now, can't you? Even as you hear these words, even as thoughts flicker and feelings flow, something underneath remains utterly still. That stillness isn't yours to keep or lose. It's what you are. It's the ground that was never shaken. This is why the ancient masters laughed when asked, "How can I find peace?" They laughed because the one asking the question was peace itself, pretending not to know. So when I say, fall into silence, I don't mean retreat from the world. I mean stop standing apart from it. Stop trying to cage the bird of awareness in a net of discipline and method. Let it fly and you'll see it was never outside you to begin with. When you no longer try to make silence happen, you realize that silence has always been happening, even in the middle of noise, even in the middle of chaos, even in the middle of you. And when you fall into that, there is no longer a listener and a sound, no longer a seeker and a goal. There is just this vast, unbroken presence, endlessly expressing itself as the song of life. You know, once you begin to taste that silence, not as a special experience, but as the ordinary hum beneath all things, life starts to feel rather different. You notice that there is a rhythm to it all, a kind of dance between what is and what is becoming. And this, perhaps, is one of the most delightful discoveries of awakening, that stillness and movement were never opposed to each other. They are the two sides of one coin, turning endlessly in the light. The mind, you see, has always imagined life as a journey from ignorance to knowledge, from sin to salvation, from confusion to clarity. We think of existence as a kind of ladder we must climb, rung by rung, until we reach some final, shining summit called enlightenment. But what if there is no summit? What if the whole point of the climb was the climbing itself? Life is not a problem to be solved, nor a race to be won. It is a song to be sung, a dance to be danced. When you listen to music, you don't fast forward to the end just to hear the last chord. The delight is in the unfolding, the crescendos, the pauses, the subtle variations that make the melody alive. And so, with this dance of being and becoming, you are not a creature trapped in time, crawling toward eternity. You are eternity pretending to crawl through time, enjoying every step of the masquerade. In this dance, being is the stillness, the silent awareness that never changes. Becoming is the music, the constant flux of form and feeling and thought. Without being, there would be no harmony. Without becoming, there would be no song. They depend on each other, like inhale and exhale, like front and back. And when you see that they are inseparable, you stop trying to freeze the movement, you start to enjoy it. You realize, then, that the whole universe is engaged in a kind of play. The Hindus call it Leela, the divine game. The cosmos isn't marching towards some serious destination. It's improvising, dancing, delighting in its own endless creativity. Stars explode not because they have a goal, but because that's their way of laughing. Trees sway because the wind wants to flirt with them. Rivers wander because straight lines bore them. And human beings, well, we dance, we love, we make art, we build cities, we invent gods, all because that's what this particular corner of the universe is doing right now. And here's the great secret. You are not watching the dance. You are the dance. You are the music moving through form, the silence singing itself as sound. You are not the audience observing life. You are life observing itself, forgetting and remembering in every heartbeat. When you see this, the great anxiety that haunts so many people, the fear of making a mistake, begins to fade. For how could life make a mistake? Every misstep is just a new rhythm, every fall a turn in the choreography. Even suffering, even confusion, are movements in the same divine ballet. We've been taught to think of imperfection as failure, but awakening shows you that imperfection is how perfection expresses itself in time. The flower doesn't bloom forever, it withers and dies, and in that death, it feeds the soil for new blossoms. The music doesn't play endlessly, it must end, or it could never begin again. So, rather than trying to hold on to peace, or chase enlightenment as if it were the final note in a symphony, dance with it all. Laugh when you stumble. Cry when the melody turns sad. For every note, high or low, belongs to the same song. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about this dance is that it requires no dancer. It just happens spontaneously, joyfully. The universe breathes itself in and out, moment by moment. And in each exhalation, it forgets what it was. In each inhalation, it rediscovers itself anew. You and I, right now, are simply one of those breaths, a shimmering pattern in the eternal rhythm. We are not here to reach the end of the song. We are here to feel it, to move with it, to dissolve in it, again and again. So don't try to escape the dance by clinging to the stillness, and don't lose yourself in the movement by forgetting the silence. See that they are one, the silence dancing, the movement resting. And when you see that, there is no longer a watcher of the dance, nor even a dancer, only the dance itself, aware that it's dancing. And that awareness, that simple, unself-conscious joy of being, is what I would call freedom. You know, it's an odd thing that the closer we come to truth, the less there is to say about it. The deepest insight doesn't shout, it whispers. And sometimes it doesn't even whisper, it simply sits there, smiling. We human beings are terribly fond of words. We build towers of them, we worship them, we argue over them as though they were reality itself. Yet words are only symbols, sounds we've agreed upon to point at something far greater. The trouble comes when we forget that the pointing finger is not the moon. We begin worshipping the finger, polishing it, decorating it, and completely missing the radiant light it was meant to show us. You see, words can describe a path, but they can never carry you there. They can tell you about water, but they cannot make you wet. They can describe love, but they cannot make your heart ache in that sweet, inexplicable way that only love can. And so, the masters of old, those strange, smiling sages, often said less and less as they grew wiser, not because they were hiding secrets, but because they discovered that speech always disturbs the stillness it tries to express. When you speak of silence, it vanishes. When you describe truth, it slips between the syllables. And so the wisest teachers learn to speak not to fill the space, but to remind you of the space between the words. Even now, as I speak to you, notice that every phrase I utter must ride upon a current of silence. The sound arises, it vibrates for a moment, and it returns, leaving behind the same quiet that was there before. It's this silence, not the words, that carries the real message. If you listen between the lines, you can feel it, an openness, an invitation, a kind of peace that doesn't depend on meaning at all. In Zen, they say, those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know. But of course, that saying itself is a bit of a joke, because here we are, speaking about it, and that's perfectly all right, so long as we don't mistake the echo for the song. A finger pointing at the moon can be useful, provided you remember to look at the moon. That's why, in many traditions, the greatest teachings are delivered not in words, but in presence. A master might answer a profound question with a laugh, or a shout, or by simply walking away. And the student, if he is ready, receives more from that moment of wordless recognition than from 1,000 sermons. Because presence speaks a language older than speech, a language that the trees and rivers and stars have always known. It says, this is it. No explanation needed. Once you begin to sense that, you understand that silence isn't empty. It's full of everything that words can only hint at. Silence holds the fragrance of understanding long before thought blooms into language. It carries the whole of existence without effort, without needing to explain itself. And when you meet someone who abides in that silence, truly abides in it, you feel it. You may not understand why, but their very presence changes the atmosphere around them. It's as though the noise of the world softens for a moment. You breathe easier. You sense a kind of space, a permission simply to be. That's why the greatest teaching is not in what such a person says, but in the way they are. Their laughter, their stillness, their eyes, even their ordinariness, all radiate the same message, that there's nothing to prove, nowhere to go, nothing missing. Silence communicates that effortlessly. It speaks of wholeness without dividing the world into parts. It teaches without explaining, comforts without promising, awakens without disturbing. You might even say that the universe itself is always speaking in silence. Every rustle of leaves, every pulse of the stars, every breath you take, all of it is the sound of silence expressing itself. And this, perhaps, is the supreme paradox, that silence is not the absence of communication, but the fullness of it. So, the next time you find yourself searching for the right words, remember that the most eloquent thing you can offer is your stillness. Because when the mind grows quiet, the heart begins to hear what words could never say. And then you understand why. At the end of all great teachings, there is always a pause, a silence, so alive it hums. That silence is not an ending. It's the invitation to see for yourself. Now, you see, once this insight begins to dawn, when the chatter subsides and silence becomes a friend rather than a stranger, something quite wonderful happens. Life doesn't stop. It doesn't suddenly become a solemn meditation hall or a grand performance of holiness. No, it carries on exactly as before. The kettle whistles, the traffic hums, children laugh, someone argues next door. The difference is that you are no longer at odds with any of it. You begin to live the answer rather than think about it. And what is the answer? Well, it's not a sentence or a philosophy. It's this: whatever is happening right now. To live the answer means you no longer divide experience into sacred and profane, spiritual and ordinary. The washing of dishes, the writing of letters, the making of love, the mending of mistakes, all of it becomes one seamless movement of life expressing itself. You realize there was never any separation between the divine and the daily. You see, enlightenment is not a transformation into something better. It's the relaxation into what already is. The Buddha still had to eat. Lao Tzu still walked the dusty roads of China. Jesus still wept. Awakening doesn't lift you out of humanity, it brings you fully into it. It means you taste life directly, without commentary, without needing to edit or defend it. So the question naturally arises, if there's no separate self, no doer, then how should I live? And the answer, of course, is that you don't decide how to live living lives itself. When you stop interfering, when you stop trying to steer the river, it finds its own way, and you find yourself moving with it. And curiously enough, what flows from that is not chaos, but harmony. You find that kindness comes naturally, that generosity doesn't need to be forced, because when you see that the other is not truly other, compassion becomes as effortless as breathing. You don't love people because you think you should. You love them because, in some quiet way, you recognize them as yourself, wearing a different mask. Likewise, creativity blossoms. When the sense of I must succeed falls away, art begins to pour out of you the way laughter pours from a child. The brush moves, the words appear, the song writes itself, and it all feels like play, because there's no one left to take credit or blame. Even the difficulties of life, loss, illness, disappointment take on a new texture. They still hurt, of course, but the resistance softens. You see them not as punishments, but as waves in the same ocean. You stop demanding that life be smooth, and instead marvel at the beauty of its roughness. Living the answer means you no longer argue with what is. You dance with it, just as it is crooked steps, missed beats, laughter, and tears alike. And in that dance, morality arises not from commandments or fear, but from understanding. You don't refrain from harming others because of rules. You simply see that there are no others to harm. To hurt another would be like biting your own tongue and blaming the mouth. So you live gently, not because you're trying to be good, but because goodness flows naturally from clarity. You work, but work becomes service. You rest, but rest becomes gratitude. You breathe, and breathing itself becomes a prayer without words. And in this way, life ceases to be a problem and becomes a kind of art. Each moment is a brushstroke on the canvas of eternity. And whether it's light or dark, thick or thin, it's all part of the same masterpiece. Of course, the mind will sometimes try to claim it again. It will say, now I understand the secret of living. And it will attempt to hold on to systematize the mystery. That's perfectly fine. That too is part of the play. You don't have to fight it. Let the mind make its little castles. They will wash away in the next tide, and the sea will remain unchanged. So to live, the answer is really to trust life, to trust that whatever this vast, unfathomable happening is, it knows how to be itself. You don't need to fix it. You don't even need to understand it. You just need to participate in it, wholeheartedly, like a dancer who forgets the steps and remembers the rhythm. And when you do that, everything becomes simple again. You find that the so-called ordinary moments, the taste of tea, the feeling of rain, the smile of a stranger, carry a kind of quiet radiance. They whisper the same secret. You are home. For home was never a place or a condition. Home is the recognition that there was never anywhere else to go. So live the answer. Breathe it. Let it walk through you. Let it laugh and stumble and sing. Because when you live like that, even your smallest gesture, the way you pour a cup of water or greet the morning, becomes the universe celebrating itself through you. And so, after all the searching, all the talking, all the practicing and letting go, we arrive at the simplest and perhaps most scandalous discovery of all, that there was never anywhere to go and no one to get there. This, my friends, is what I like to call the cosmic joke. For you see, the whole drama of existence, the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars, the comedies and tragedies of our little lives, is the universe playing hide and seek with itself. It pretends to be lost just for the exquisite joy of being found again. You and I, we are the divine, pretending to be human, pretending to be confused, pretending to need saving all for the sheer thrill of rediscovery. It's as if God were saying to itself, wouldn't it be wonderful to forget who I am so that I can remember again and experience the surprise of awakening? And when that remembering happens, when the curtain lifts even a little, what else can you do but laugh? It's not a laugh of mockery or superiority. It's the deep, bubbling laughter of relief, the laughter of someone who has been searching for his glasses all morning, only to find them sitting right on his nose. The laugh that bursts out when you realize the thing you've been chasing through lifetimes was never missing. It's the laughter that arises when the burden of me drops away and life is suddenly weightless again. Because you see, the one who was suffering, striving, worrying, that was just a thought, a phantom, a character in a play. And now the play goes on, but you no longer mistake yourself for the part. You play it with gusto, fully, vividly yet lightly, knowing it's all make-believe. That's the freedom the sages speak of. Not the end of the play, but the end of taking the play so damned seriously. You still feel pain? Of course. You still cry. You still stub your toe and pay your bills. But underneath it all is a kind of quiet amusement, a background chuckle that says, ah, yes, here we go again, the dance continues. And this laughter is not cynical, it's tender. It's the laughter of compassion, because you see how earnestly everyone is taking the game. You see yourself in their struggles, their hopes, their fears, and you love them all the more for it. You don't try to wake them up by force, because you understand that even their sleep is part of the dream, part of the divine play. So you live, you love, you laugh, and sometimes you weep, all of it perfectly fine. There is no mistake, no misstep, no wasted moment. Every joy and every sorrow is a note in the same cosmic melody. And when you truly feel that, when you know, not as a theory, but as the very pulse of your being, that there is no separate self, no final destination, no serious problem to solve, you find yourself laughing with the stars, with the birds, with the wind. You laugh because the whole universe is laughing, laughing at itself, through you. That is why the sages of every tradition end their journeys not with solemnity, but with laughter. The Buddha smiles, Lao Tzu chuckles, the Zen masters shout nonsense and burst into fits of joy. Even the Christ, one imagines, must have smiled when he said, "Consider the lilies," because they all saw it, the grand jest, that the universe is not a trial to endure, but a song to sing, a dance to dance, a joke so magnificent it takes lifetimes to get it. And so, the awakened one laughs, not because he's above the world, but because he's finally inside it, utterly, lovingly, freely. He laughs because he sees that heaven was never elsewhere, it was this, all along. So if you must remember one thing, remember this: the goal was never to escape life, but to join the laughter of it. And when you laugh, truly laugh, from that deep place where joy and surrender meet, the universe laughs with you, because you and it were never two. And then, in the midst of that laughter, perhaps there comes a stillness, a pause, not an end, just the quiet sigh of existence resting in itself. New seeker, new teacher, new path, only this: the play, the music, the silence, the smile, and somewhere, very softly, you can almost hear it, the echo of eternity chuckling under its breath, saying, "Well then, wasn't that fun?"